What if Journey's most romantic ballad was almost thrown away? Open Arms was born from heartbreak, rejected as too soft, and nearly buried forever, until Steve Perry's voice turned it into one of rock's most unforgettable anthems. The origins of the song. Before Open Arms became a cornerstone of Journey's legacy, it was just a fragile idea sitting in Jonathan Cain's pocket notebook, a song almost too delicate for the world to hear. Long before Cain ever set foot in Journey's rehearsal room, he was grinding through the ups and downs of the music industry with the British-American rock band, The Babies. Cain had joined The Babies in the late 70s, hoping it would be the break he needed. They had moderate success, but the group constantly struggled to break into the mainstream. Cain, meanwhile, carried around melodies and lyric fragments he couldn't shake. Among them was the skeleton of a ballad he had written during a period of loneliness and personal heartbreak. He envisioned it as a piano-led love song, something that stripped away all the bravado of rock and left only raw emotion. But when he presented it to The Babies, the response was lukewarm. The band was built on harder riffs and a slick, polished sound. They didn't see room for a tender piano ballad. Cain tucked it away, but he never forgot it. By the time Cain left The Babies and got the call to join Journey, he was carrying more than just a keyboard. He was carrying unfulfilled potential. Journey, at the time, was already riding high. Steve Perry's arrival had catapulted the band into the spotlight with hits like Lovin', Touchin', Squeezin', and Any Way You Want It. But Cain sensed an opportunity. Journey was evolving, and Perry's soaring tenor was capable of much more than just rock anthems. When Cain introduced Open Arms to the band, Perry immediately understood its power. For Perry, who thrived on connecting emotionally with audiences, this song wasn't just a ballad, it was a revelation. Here was a chance to show a vulnerability few rock bands dared to expose. But the rest of the band didn't see it that way. Guitarist Neil Schon famously scoffed, calling it too syrupy, dismissing it as something that might ruin the band's rock image. For a moment, Open Arms looked like it might die in the same way it had with The Babies, overlooked and shelved. What no one realized yet was that Perry's determination, combined with Cain's conviction, would soon force everyone to listen. Steve Perry's role and emotional delivery. Steve Perry had a gift few singers ever possess, the ability to take someone else's words and make them feel like pages ripped straight from his own diary. When Jonathan Cain showed him the song that would become Open Arms, Perry didn't just hear notes and lyrics, he felt the weight behind them. At this point in his life, Perry was juggling the highs of stardom with the quiet, gnawing pain that comes with fame. Journey's success had thrust him into the spotlight, but behind closed doors, he was restless. His relationships were strained, and he often found himself caught between the demands of the band, the pressures of the industry, and the loneliness of a man living life on the road. It was the perfect storm for a song about longing, regret, and vulnerability. The first time Perry sang Open Arms during rehearsal, it changed the room. His voice didn't just glide over the melody. It broke open the meaning behind the words. Cain's heartfelt ballad suddenly sounded like a confession being torn from Perry's chest. He stretched every syllable with aching precision, carrying the kind of fragility that could bring an arena to silence. What set Perry apart wasn't just his technical mastery, though his range and control were astonishing. It was his emotional honesty. When he leaned into lines like, "So here I am, with open arms," it wasn't just a lyric, it was a plea. Fans later said they could feel his pain even if they didn't know what he was going through. That's the magic of a great frontman, turning private struggles into public catharsis. Yet, Perry's connection to the song didn't just come from performance, it came from vision. He saw what his bandmates couldn't, that ballads had the power to expand Journey's reach. He knew audiences weren't only craving electrifying guitar solos, they also wanted music that spoke to the heart. Perry argued passionately that Open Arms could be that song, the one that would live far beyond radio cycles and chart positions. His conviction was so strong that he refused to let the song be buried. Even as Neil Schon rolled his eyes, dismissing it as sappy, Perry stood firm. He poured himself into the recording session, channeling every ounce of his own turmoil into the track. By the time the final take was complete, even skeptics in the room had to admit, this wasn't just a ballad, it was something untouchable. For Perry, singing Open Arms wasn't just about performing, it was about survival. Every time he delivered it on stage, it sounded as if he was fighting for his own heart, reminding himself and the audience that pain and beauty often live side by side. Band tensions behind the scenes. If Steve Perry was the emotional heart of Open Arms, Neil Schon was its biggest skeptic. To Schon, a guitarist who had built his reputation on blistering solos and hard-hitting rock, Cain's ballad sounded like something ripped from a soap opera soundtrack. The word syrupy became his trademark dismissal. He wasn't alone either. Several band members feared that leaning too far into ballads would soften Journey's identity and alienate their core rock audience. Inside the studio, the atmosphere often turned icy. Perry and Cain would sit at the piano, working through chord progressions and vocal phrasing, while Schon and others hung back with folded arms, visibly unimpressed. Heated arguments broke out over whether the song even belonged on the Escape album. For Cain, who had already seen Open Arms rejected once by the Babies, the resistance was like déjà vu. He couldn't shake the fear that the song would be shelved forever. But Perry wasn't backing down. He knew exactly what the song could do, not just for him as a singer, but for Journey as a band. Perry's insistence sometimes came off as defiance, widening the already growing rift between him and Schon. The two respected each other musically, but their creative visions were pulling Journey in opposite directions. Schon wanted to keep the band anchored in the rock world, while Perry wanted to reach across genres and bring vulnerability into the spotlight. Producers and engineers found themselves caught in the middle, acting as mediators between clashing egos. Some nights, recording sessions stalled completely as debates erupted. Would a piano ballad destroy the band's credibility, or would it catapult them into an entirely new stratosphere? Even after the song was recorded, tensions lingered. Perry delivered a vocal performance so powerful that it silenced most doubters, but Schon still resisted the idea of it being released as a single. To him, it was a gamble that risked Journey's carefully built rock identity. But to Cain and Perry, it was the opposite. It was the one song that could reach listeners on a level nothing else could. Ultimately, management and label executives saw the potential and sided with Perry and Cain. Open Arms made the cut for Escape. What the band didn't realize then was that this too soft ballad would soon redefine their place in rock history. But the decision came at a cost. While the song went on to conquer the charts, the creative divide it exposed within the band would continue to simmer, an early crack in the foundation of a group that, at the height of its fame, looked unshakable from the outside. The song's impact on Journey's career. When Open Arms finally reached the world in 1982, the gamble that once divided Journey turned into one of the smartest risks they ever took. Released as a single from the Escape album, the song didn't just climb the charts, it soared, peaking at number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100. At a time when power ballads were rare in mainstream rock, Journey suddenly found themselves at the forefront of a new wave of arena-sized emotion. Radio stations played it relentlessly, couples dedicated it to each other, DJs called it the ultimate love song. And suddenly, Journey wasn't just a band that filled stadiums with fists in the air. They were a band that filled wedding halls, prom dances, and breakup playlists. The reach of Open Arms extended far beyond rock culture, cementing Journey as a household name across generations. But that success was a double-edged sword. On the one hand, the song gave the band unprecedented crossover appeal. People who had never considered themselves rock fans were now singing along to Journey. The fan base grew wider, their concerts bigger, and their sales skyrocketed. Open Arms became the ballad that every other rock band wished they had. On the other hand, it deepened the creative rift within the group. For Neil Schon, watching the song climb the charts was bittersweet. He couldn't deny its success, but he also couldn't shake the feeling that Journey was drifting away from the gritty rock roots he had worked so hard to build. Interviews from the time show a band that was both celebrating and quietly fracturing, caught between two identities, the rock warriors and the ballad kings. Still, for fans and critics, the verdict was clear. Open Arms wasn't just another hit single, it was a cultural moment. The vulnerability in Perry's voice, combined with Cain's hauntingly simple piano chords, created a track that resonated universally. Unlike many hits of the early 80s that faded with trends, Open Arms lodged itself permanently in the soundtrack of people's lives. And yet, perhaps the most fascinating part of its impact is this. The very song that once threatened to divide Journey ended up uniting audiences like nothing else. It proved that sometimes the risk of breaking formula is exactly what keeps a band alive: love, pain, and the lyrics. The magic of Open Arms lies in its simplicity. Unlike the complex metaphors and layered poetry often found in rock ballads, Jonathan Cain's lyrics read like a straightforward plea. So here I am, with open arms, hoping you'll see what your love means to me. At first glance, they almost seem too simple, but that was genius. The words cut directly to the heart, bypassing overthinking and speaking to something universal: regret, reconciliation, and the desperate hope for love's return. Cain had written the bones of the song during a time of personal turmoil. His relationships were fragile, his career uncertain, and his sense of belonging constantly in question. Open Arms wasn't born from polished ambition. It was born from a man reaching out, trying to hold together something slipping away. When Steve Perry stepped into the vocal booth, he carried those emotions even further, layering Cain's longing with his own private struggles. By the early 80s, Perry's life had become a whirlwind. Fame brought adoration, but also isolation. His relationships often suffered under the weight of his career, and the pain of those fractures echoed in his performance. Every time he sang the line, "Living without you, living alone, this empty house seems so cold," it didn't feel like he was just interpreting lyrics. It sounded like he was confessing. This was where Perry's artistry shined most. He had the ability to take a simple phrase and breathe devastation into it. Listeners didn't just hear a man asking for love. They felt the ache of sleepless nights, the sting of regret, and the fragile hope of reconciliation. For audiences, that vulnerability was groundbreaking. Rock music of the time often celebrated excess, bravado, and rebellion. Yet here was Journey, led by Perry's aching voice, offering a song that stripped away all armor and said, "I'm broken, I need you, I can't do this alone." That level of honesty resonated deeply. Fans attached their own heartbreaks to the song, turning it into a personal anthem for millions. Even today, decades later, Open Arms carries that same raw power. Play it in a room, and it instantly conjures emotion, memories of lost love, reconciliations that never happened, or the hope that maybe one day they could. It's proof that sometimes the most straightforward words sung with sincerity can leave the deepest scars. Legacy and covers. For a song that nearly didn't make it out of the studio, Open Arms has left one of the biggest footprints in rock history. Over the decades, it has evolved beyond just a Journey hit, becoming a timeless anthem covered, celebrated, and reimagined across nearly every genre of music. Almost immediately after its release, artists began to recognize its potential as a standard. Its stripped-down structure, simple piano chords, aching lyrics, and a soaring melody made it a natural fit for vocal powerhouses. Mariah Carey brought it back into the spotlight in the 1990s with a version that topped charts in Asia, while Celine Dion performed it on tour, proving that the song's emotional weight could transcend both culture and generation. Even operatic singers have taken on the challenge, stretching its already soaring notes into something almost classical. Beyond covers, Open Arms has lived on in film and television. It has underscored love scenes, heartbreaks, and reunions in countless shows and movies, becoming a shorthand for vulnerability and longing. Wedding DJs still spin it, and for many couples, it remains the ultimate slow dance. Decades later, its reach shows no signs of fading. It's still a staple on streaming playlists titled Love Songs or Heartbreak Classics. And perhaps the sweetest irony? Neil Schon, the man who once dismissed the song as too syrupy, eventually admitted its brilliance. In interviews years later, Schon acknowledged that Open Arms had given Journey a kind of staying power that even their hardest rock tracks couldn't achieve. What he once saw as a threat to their credibility had, in hindsight, become a cornerstone of their legacy. For Journey as a band, the song became more than just a hit. It became part of their identity. No matter how many albums they released or tours they embarked on, audiences would always clamor for Open Arms. It was the one moment in every show where the noise dropped, the lights dimmed, and tens of thousands of voices joined in to sing a ballad that, for all its softness, had become larger than life. Today, Open Arms stands not only as one of Journey's defining tracks, but as one of the greatest ballads in rock history. It proved that vulnerability has a place in rock, that simplicity can be powerful, and that sometimes the songs born in conflict end up carrying the greatest legacy. In the end, Open Arms is more than a song. It's a story of resistance, vulnerability, and the strange way that music born from conflict can unite millions. The ballad that nearly tore Journey apart became the anthem that solidified their place in rock history. Sometimes, the songs we fight hardest to protect are the ones that outlast us all. And if you want more untold stories behind the hits that shape generations, don't forget to subscribe to Backstage Melody, where the music's past is always alive.